now it's time to give the floor for Mikko. So Mikko is also our alumnus and working as adjunct professor of environmental policy, but also as a principal investigator at the Consumer Society Research Center at the University of Helsinki. I have to read a bit that I actually say it correctly. So you are kind of exploring and developing practices on knowledge co-creation and democratic deliberation, and especially in the governance of research, innovation, and environments. Was it so, Mikko?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Also the name, I must check it sometimes. Our institute, they keep changing them.
And hey, you can point out questions or comments in the chat. Adam is following the chat, so we are able to also lift up questions during the Mikko's talk, and also then afterwards we have a good time for questions and comments on the topic. So feel free to use the chat. But I would say, Mikko, thank you for being here. The stage is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be in the first of this kind of meeting. So please say any comments. If you want to interrupt me during the talk, just do it, and then we can continue afterwards also. So I start sharing my slides, so that helped me making my points. So can you now see?
Yes, very good.
Perfect. Yeah. So how participatory budgeting can help mitigate societal polarization, or can it? That's the question to be discussed here. And polarization, this is the old view. It's a very stubborn problem. Here is from Plato. 2000 and more years ago, he was saying that any city, small or big, is divided in two. One, a city of the poor, and the other, a city of the rich. And these are at war with one another. And either they are many small divisions, and you would be altogether beside the mark if you treated them all as a single state. So this is how Plato recognized the issue of polarization some 2000 plus years ago. And here is a polarization, a modern view. This is from ethnic and racial studies. So I'm just saying that immigration is some of the most dividing issues currently in our societies. In many ways, there is kind of resistance on the immigration movement, but also the immigration in itself contributes to societal polarization and structural inequalities. And what is perhaps the modern element in this new type of polarization is that there is very big diversity. There is diversity of diversity, which is called by Vertovec as super diversity. So that means that if we try to make some corrections, if we try to think about some problems of some particular segment of society, like Russian-speaking population in Helsinki, it's not one block; it's a very diverse entity. So it makes a bit difficult how to understand polarization, and we need a little go further from Plato's time. This is just, I will very quickly give some kind of impressions of how polarization looks in Helsinki, because my talk is more optimistic talk. I'm thinking more about the tools to address or even mitigate polarization. But here is how it looks like in practice. In these days, Helsinki, here is some voting statistics from our last municipal elections. And as you can see, there is like the highest percentage of voting is about 80% in some Western regions like areas of city in Helsinki, like Lauttasaari, Munkkiniemi, rich areas, people who have better education and better income levels, higher income levels, they correlate with higher voting activity. And if you compare that to some areas, some of them are in the eastern part of Helsinki, like Jakomäki and Kontula, it's around 40%. So it's a very big difference in terms of how political interest and voting activity looks like in Helsinki. Here is another aspect of what are the reasons behind and what kind of issues are related to polarization. This is how migration looks like in Finland from one particular point of view, namely how Russian-speaking population, the number of Russian-speaking population is increasing in Finland. And as you can see, it's a very steady increase year after year. And what happens that it mostly concentrates in Helsinki region. And if you read some studies about what kind of issues are emerging with this increasing number of immigrants, there are challenges of integration. There are financial uncertainties related to unemployment, for example, and there is evidence of societal rejection and discrimination even. And there are naturally big cultural differences. There are different norms, different habits, different understanding of how, for example, our democratic systems operate in Finland or Russia. And then there is misinformation or even disinformation coming from various sources. And this causes really some challenges on how these populations can be integrated, and with problems of integration, problems of polarization also emerge. Here is, I was told to make a relaxed presentation, so there is how artificial intelligence wanted to help me find imaginary for polarization. They put a polar bear. I'm not talking about polar bears, but I'm next moving to think about the potential of participatory budgeting in addressing these challenges. So I don't know how many of you know, are familiar with participatory budgeting process, but just to say something, it's a new democratic innovation study. It started in 1989 from Brazil, and it has been very, very successful in spreading from Brazil to all continents, including Europe, including Finland. And the idea with participatory budgeting is that anybody, any citizen, any resident can propose some ideas where cities should invest in making city a better place to live. And then when there are many, many ideas proposed by citizens, citizens themselves can vote what are the best ideas, and then there is a budget provided by the city, and the best ideas will be implemented. And so it's direct democracy in a very concrete manner, and it's proximity democracy in the sense that those projects are mostly implemented in locations, in localities, and people participate in implementing many of the plans and projects. And it's also deliberative democracy, meaning that people negotiate and discuss and also co-create those plans in collaboration with other residents and also experts from the city. And we could add that it's also e-democracy, since there are many times hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas, and they are treated and managed in online platforms. So it's also e-democracy in a very strong sense. And if you look at the numbers there, so there are reports that more than 11,000 cases of participatory budgeting have been implemented in globally, 4,500 plus in Europe, and in Finland the activity started in 2012. Actually, our Central Library of Helsinki was the first PV project here, and since then, since 2012, more and more municipalities have become interested, and now there are about 40 plus municipalities exercising this process. And city of Helsinki has been one of the leading actors, especially regarding the scale or the amount of money to be shared through this participatory budgeting or PB process. So in the very first round of PB in Helsinki, there was 4.4 million budget, and now there is an ongoing PB process, and there's a budget of 8.8 million euros. So if you are interested in taking part in this process, I think next month there will be events where you can contribute in co-creating new projects that will be the best of which will be voted this autumn. So here is something what explains the success of PB in traveling throughout the globe. So unlike many, so public participation has become a new kind of mainstream paradigm of developing democratic decision making. And there are various types of activities, but many of them are consultative. They only give further information to political leaders, but participatory budgeting, it's hardwired policy making. It means that people can actually have power directly by providing ideas and selecting the best ideas through a direct voting. And if you look at the travel of PB, it's also politically very flexible, because both left and right-wing governments have found it a very useful process and therefore advanced it in their countries and cities and governments. And there is also one of the attractions and successes of PB has been that it has been very strong in empowering marginalized groups like immigrants or young people or women that are many times less in the center of political decision making. So Porto Alegre was the very first place in which they have carried out PB since 1989 in a continuous manner, and there is a kind of longitudinal evidence and understanding what happens, what are the long-term impacts of this process in cities' life. And in addition to empowering those marginalized groups, there is also a shift in the investments towards most supporting most disadvantaged districts, like investments in infrastructure or healthcare or that kind of things that are helpful in supporting basic activities of the disadvantaged groups. From America, there is also evidence that PB has increased civic participation from previously uninvolved residents. So there is strong evidence, and this year there is a publication, very interesting publication from New York City University, where they showed that when people participate in PB process, what happens is that their activity in normal state elections increased by 8.4%, and that was a very this result was published in Journal of Political Behavior, which is a very highly reputed journal. So it was a very carefully prepared study and very interesting, strong evidence of how PB can stimulate or help people, make people more active in taking part in political, public political life. However, there is mixed evidence that PB can also just repeat existing inequalities. So that's why it's interesting to think about what happened in Helsinki. So we had a study group following the very first round of Helsinki PB 2018-2020. We followed it more than 2 years, did a comprehensive evaluation, and if you are interested, here is the link to the openly available publication. It's under way to be translated also in English. So in many ways, the Helsinki PB, that was called OMA study, it was successful. More than 1,200 proposals were made by citizens, and nearly 50,000 people voted, take part in the voting procedure. This is 8.6% of the population of Helsinki. However, and very unfortunately, minority groups, including immigrants, young people, and older people, were underrepresented. And there are many reasons and many different ways in which those people were kind of less active. For example, older people, they were not probably that skillful in using web and the online voting system, which explains their very low voting activity level. So that was the experience from the very first round, but luckily this process has been organized as a big societal experiment, and in the spirit of experimentation there has been an experiment on experiment, namely Sitra, our National Innovation Fund, funded a democracy experiment last year, and actually it is continuing until end of March this year, one week more. And that experiment focused on how to support Russian-speaking population participate in the PB process in the second round that is now ongoing. And in that experiment, they involved a Russian cultural foundation called Kultura, and it proved to be a very good choice because Kultura has existing connections and networks to Russian populations, and in that sense it worked as a kind of broker or cultural translator organization that proved to be very useful in interpreting the process. And what was, I think, quite innovative there is that they educated Russian-speaking facilitators that helped Russian speakers to provide more ideas. And resulting from this was that as much as 73 proposals by those Russian speakers were developed in the second round, which is way more than in the last round. So this is
Mikko,
my last.
I have one question in the chat, which was in the previous slide. It talks about young people being underrepresented in the turnout and voting. And the question is, do you know what caused that and what affected that? Because young people in general are quite familiar with IT and kind of, digital engagement in that respect. So what do you think, or do you know what kind of caused that problem?
Yeah, so as I said, it's a very good question. So as I said, it had a very mixed phases. So young people were actually more active in the voting stage, but not they didn't make any proposals, or they were very inactive in making proposals, but they were quite active in voting, and that the reason is that schools were some schools were very active in promoting this PB process, whereas some other schools were zero active. So there is a huge discrepancy. And what was most surprising in youth participation, that in the voting, like 30% of the class 7 to 9 students participate in the voting, but people in high school or upper secondary school, they were really inactive. So
that's interesting. But and also, so what is, perhaps you mentioned it earlier, what is the age then that people can start voting for these programs?
Oh yeah, that's again a very good point, because Helsinki was radical. The age limit was 12 years.
Wow.
So so there is a kind of ongoing discussion whether all schools of Helsinki should include PB in their school curriculum, which could result in very high voting results. It could influence that this would become a kind of maneuver of the youth.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Kind of over-representation of youths. Do we want this kind of PB? It's a political decision.
Yeah. That's really interesting, though. Thank you. That was great.
Yeah. Actually, I was about to make a short representation to leave time for talking. So here are this is practically my last slide. So thinking about potential and limitations regarding how PB might help addressing polarization. So there is evidence that PB can activate citizens like youth people, immigrants in the Citra experiment. For example, it was an incredible impact. The Russian-speaking facilitators, they became activists, or they really got interested in city issues in Helsinki. And this is not the only instance of such to happen when people take part in this kind of PB or participatory activities. It raises people's curiosity and interest in political issues. Another benefit is that working on concrete proposals is very helpful. It avoids the kind of typical politicized issues that relate to polarization. So it helps do some concrete things in your locality. And as mentioned, it's very effective democratic education. So this is the way democracy happens in Finland, and also in schools. You could have it in school curriculum, even though it is not yet there, and it should be a point of discussion. What are the limitations is that PB is very complicated process and it's very expensive. And when in the first round, the city shared 4.4 million, they used 4.4 million to share the money. So transaction cost is 100%. Do we want to pay that money to share the same amount for public projects? And another bigger issue is that polarization, inequality are rooted in structural issues, and now the PB budget was 1 per mil of the city of Helsinki budget. So is it really enough to try to manage any or address any structural inequalities? I'm doubtful of that. And finally, if poorly implement it or manage this kind of PV processes can just renew inequalities, because there is a tendency that the active people that are already active, they also join and use PB as their vehicle of political influence. So these are my points, and I'm very happy to discuss any observation issues you find interesting.